I don't know why people hire architects and then tell them what to do.
Hmm.
That quote from the architect, Frank Gehry,
Mm-hmm.
it really it cuts right to the heart of our deep dive today, doesn't it?
It really does. Captures that inherent tension perfectly. Whether we're talking skyscrapers or complex software, architecture never just happens in a technical vacuum.
Right. It's always performed within the larger context, often a pretty messy context of a development project.
Exactly. Managed by people worried about schedules, budgets, the whole nine yards.
So our mission today is to take a look at some highly regarded sources on architecture and distill one key idea. What responsibilities does the architect have that come directly from these project realities?
We're going beyond just the technical blueprints here.
Yeah, focusing on those crucial professional relationships, how the architect works with the project manager, how they adapt to things like incremental delivery, agile processes.
And importantly, how they handle the challenges of distributed teams, which is becoming more and more the norm.
Our source material really digs into the practical application side of things, stuff you'd need for, say, college or graduate level understanding.
It's all about how the technical design has to integrate with the project's operational strategy. Architecture is the means to an end, really.
The end being a successful project delivery. Okay, let's unpack this. Where should we start? Maybe that essential partnership, the architect and the project manager.
Makes sense. If you've ever seen a project go sideways, chances are those two weren't communicating effectively.
So how do the roles differ? It seems like a clear duality.
It really is. You've got the project manager, the PM. They're primarily responsible for the external-facing stuff.
Like budget, schedule, staffing, reporting performance to stakeholders. They're worried about when it gets done.
Precisely. They own that external view. Then you have the software architect.
And they're responsible for the internal technical side, the design, how it's built, the structure, worrying about how we build it and if it'll last.
Exactly. The internal technical reality. And the key is ensuring those two views align. The external picture the PM presents must reflect what's really happening technically, including risks.
And the internal work needs to support the external goals.
Right. The PM often relies on frameworks like the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK, and that's where the architect steps in as the indispensable technical advisor.
It's interesting how broad that support role actually is based on our sources. It's way more than just diagrams and code structure.
Oh, absolutely. People might think the architect just manages technical dependencies, but they end up managing people dependencies too, indirectly.
How so? Let's look at those PMBOK areas.
Okay, take project integration management. The architect creates the design, the module structure.
Which then directly influences how the team is organized, right? Who works on what piece.
Exactly. It defines who needs to collaborate. They're shaping the team structure around the technical design.
And then there's project scope management. That sounds like requirements.
It is. The architect helps elicit, negotiate, and review requirements, both runtime and development time requirements. They estimate the cost, the schedule impact, the risks involved.
Okay, what about project human resource management? That sounds really far from code.
You'd think so, but the architect defines the technical skills needed on the team. They often help interview candidates. They even mentor developers on their technical career paths.
Wow, that's a significant organizational role. Defining skills, interviewing, mentoring.
It is. But maybe the most critical support is in project risk management.
Identifying what could go wrong, technically.
Yes, but not just identifying, quantifying those risks. If we choose this database, there's a 60% chance we failed the security audit, which would cost us X weeks. And then, crucially, adjusting the architecture or the development process to mitigate those risks.
So the architect needs to be really proactive in supporting the PM across all these areas. It's a true technical partnership.
Absolutely necessary. Without it, projects tend to drift, both technically and from a management perspective.
Okay, so that's the PM relationship. But how does the architecture itself get delivered? You can't just drop the whole design on day one, especially now. How does it fit with incremental delivery?
That's a great point. Even if you're not doing full-blown agile, architecture needs to be developed and released in increments. It should follow the project's own rhythm for testing and releasing.
And those first increments sound critical. What architectural documents absolutely have to be released early?
Well, the first, and perhaps most crucial, is the module decomposition structure.
Why that one specifically?
Because, as we just touched on, it directly informs the team structure. You can't effectively staff the project, assign budgets, or even plan training until the architecture defines the main components and who owns them. The technical map creates the organizational map.
That's a really powerful connection. Architecture shaping HR. What else is needed in that first drop?
You also need the module uses structure. That shows how different parts of the system depend on each other. It's vital for planning future increments, knowing what needs to be built before something else can work.
So you can build things in a logical order or maybe release functional subsets.
Exactly. You also usually need the main component and connector, C&C structure, whichever diagram best shows the overall solution approach. And finally, a broad brush deployment structure.
To answer the big infrastructure questions early, like are we on mobile devices? Is this going into the cloud? That kind of thing.
Precisely. Settle the major deployment environment questions up front.
Now, after that first increment, how do you decide what comes next?
Stakeholder needs should guide subsequent architectural releases. But here's a key insight our sources emphasize. Ensure the early increments tackle the system's most challenging quality attribute requirements.
So deal with the hard stuff like performance or security or maybe complex reliability needs early on. Why not push that off?
Because you risk discovering fundamental problems too late. Imagine waiting until increment 5 to seriously test your core performance needs, only to find out your chosen framework just can't handle the load.
That sounds like a disaster. A huge, costly rewrite late in the game.
Exactly, it blows up the schedule and budget. Validating those tough quality attributes architecturally early on is non-negotiable for complex systems.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now let's address the elephant in the room, the historical tension between architecture and agile development.
Yes. Agile really started as a kind of rebellion against those super rigid, documentation-heavy approaches. Remember big design up front, or BDUF?
Where everything was planned and documented down to the last detail before anyone wrote a line of code. Waterfall style.
Right, and the tension still exists, but experience has kind of shown us that neither extreme works well for large, complex projects.
So on one end you have BDUF. What's the other extreme?
That's the purely emergent approach, the idea that architecture just sort of materializes organically as developers deliver increments, no real upfront design.
Does that ever work?
Our sources are pretty clear. It can work for small, simple projects, maybe a small team, straightforward requirements. But it tends to fail, often spectacularly, when you introduce real complexity or scale.
So the industry needed something in the middle. And the text talks about this iteration zero approach. Doesn't that just sound like BDUF with a new name?
That's a fair question. It sounds similar, but the key difference is the intent and the scope. Iteration zero isn't about designing every single class and method up front.
Okay, so what is it about?
It's about dedicating maybe one or a few early iterations specifically to foundational architectural work. The focus is usually on attribute-driven design, or ADD.
Just to remind ourselves, ADD means focusing the design on hitting those critical quality attributes,
Yeah.
performance, security, modifiability, before diving deep into specific user features.
Exactly. So in iteration zero, you're choosing the major architectural patterns, the core frameworks, maybe key technology stacks, the main components, things needed to satisfy those big idioties.
So you lay down a solid foundation before the main feature development kicks off, structuring things without freezing everything prematurely.
That's the idea. It provides essential structure and guidance without being overly prescriptive like old school BDUF.
But what about changing requirements? Agile is built for change. If a major technical question or a volatile requirement pops up mid-project, how does the architect handle that without derailing everything?
That's where a technique called a spike comes in.
A spike, like a railroad spike.
Sort of. Think of it as a focused technical experiment. It's a short, strictly time-boxed task created specifically to answer a tough technical question or explore a risky area.
So it's like a mini research project within the sprint.
Pretty much. It's usually developed in a separate code branch. You try something out. If the experiment works, if it answers the question or validates an approach, then the useful code might get merged back. If not, you discard it.
So it's a controlled way to investigate uncertainty without polluting the main code base or committing to a solution too early.
Exactly. Manages technical risk and volatility within the Agile flow.
This brings us back to that sort of manifesto myth. The early Agile narrative sometimes felt like, if you're not shipping working code right now, you're wasting time. Architecture. Schmarchitecture.
Yeah, that was definitely a sentiment, and frankly, that view has largely crumbled under the weight of real-world systems engineering, especially for anything medium-sized or larger.
Why?
Because you simply cannot bolt on things like serious security, high performance, or system safety late in the development cycle. It doesn't work. If you just start coding features and hope the right architecture emerges,
It probably won't.
an architecture will emerge for sure, but it will almost certainly be the wrong one that can't actually support the long-term quality needs or scale effectively. It needs conscious design.
So looking at the 12 agile principles that accompany the manifesto,
Mm.
our sources seem to agree with many of them, like continuous delivery, sustainable pace, attention to technical excellence.
Right. About 6 principles get a strong thumbs up,
That-
but there are a couple where there's strong disagreement, and they really highlight why conscious architecture is still vital.
What's the first big disagreement?
It's the principle that says the most efficient and effective method of conveying information is face-to-face conversation.
Okay, that sounds reasonable on the surface. Why disagree?
Because for any non-trivial system, especially one that needs to be maintained or evolved over years, relying only on conversation is just insufficient. People forget. People leave the team.
Ah, the maintenance problem. What happens 5 years later when the original developers are gone?
Exactly. Where's that face-to-face conversation then? Critical information like interfaces, key structural decisions, communication protocols, these must be documented in writing. It's essential for longevity, scale, and bringing new people up to speed.
So conversation is good, but not enough on its own. Written documentation is non-negotiable for complex systems. What's the second major point of disagreement?
It's the principle stating that the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams.
And the counter-argument is?
That the best architectures don't just emerge spontaneously. They are consciously designed by people with specific skills, training, talent, and experience in architecture. Design is a specialized discipline.
So while the implementation details might emerge incrementally from the team,
The core architectural skeleton, the fundamental structure that enables those qualities we talked about, needs intentional design by skilled architects. It doesn't just happen by accident.
that leads nicely into bringing this intentionality to larger organizations.
Right.
The sources mention the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFE. How does SAFE handle this?
Well, SAFE explicitly acknowledges this tension. It talks about balancing intentional architecture, the planned, purposeful, strategic architectural decisions made up front.
With the counterbalancing force of emergent design.
Right, which is the idea that detailed design decisions and implementation specifics can evolve incrementally within the teams, guided by that intentional architecture.
So it's trying to get the best of both worlds. Strategic guidance plus tactical flexibility.
Pretty much. It's a large-scale framework acknowledging that you need smart, upfront architectural thinking to enable healthy, rapid evolution later on.
Okay, one final major area influenced by project reality. Distributed development. This feels less like a trend and more like the standard way of working now.
Absolutely. Teams spread across different buildings, different cities, different time zones, even globally. This was already accelerating, and recent world events just cemented it.
What's the core problem this introduces from an architectural perspective?
In a word, coordination. It just gets harder, much harder.
How so?
Think about a simple interface change between Module A, developed in London, and Module B, developed in Bangalore. If the developers were sitting near each other, maybe they'd sort it out over coffee. Quick chat, problem solved.
Good. Distributed.
Now, it might require scheduling a web conference across difficult time zones, dealing with potential language nuances, relying on email chains. It introduces friction and delay. Those easy, informal communication channels disappear.
So teams have to rely much more heavily on formal methods.
Exactly. Scheduled meetings, asynchronous tools like wikis or issue trackers, and critically, documentation.
Documentation again.
Yes. And this reality significantly elevates 2 specific architectural concerns. First, the allocation of responsibilities to different teams or locations becomes much more critical. You need clean boundaries.
To minimize the need for that painful cross-team coordination.
Precisely. And second, related to that, the need to actively minimize dependencies between components assigned to globally distributed teams is magnified. Every dependency across that distance is a potential bottleneck and source of delay.
So the architect isn't just designing the software anymore. They're almost designing it for the specific distributed organizational structure. The architecture needs to make that structure viable.
That's a great way to put it. The architecture must actively support the way the organization works. And that's why documentation, which might feel a bit redundant sometimes in a co-located team, becomes absolutely vital for remote teams. They need that formal record because the informal chat isn't an option.
Okay, that nicely wraps up our deep dive into how project realities shape the architect's role. We've touched on that crucial partnership with the project manager.
covering all those administrative and risk areas.
The importance of releasing the architecture itself in planned increments, especially getting those foundational documents out early.
Like the module decomposition for team structure.
We looked at the iteration zero approach as a way to blend upfront architectural thinking with agile flexibility.
Finding that middle ground between BDUF and pure emergence.
And finally, the huge impact of distributed development, emphasizing careful allocation of work and the heightened need for clear documentation.
It really highlights how architecture isn't just technical. It's deeply intertwined with how projects are run and how teams collaborate.
So connecting all these threads, especially the challenges of complexity and distributed work, it leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
We spent a lot of time talking about quality attributes like performance, security, modifiability, given everything we've discussed about coordination overhead and the difficulty of remote collaboration.
Should we now start thinking about amenable to globally distributed development as its own first-class quality attribute, something architects need to consciously design for, right alongside latency or safety?
Is the distributability of the architecture itself a key quality? That's definitely something worth mulling over. How the architecture serves not just the user, but the organization building it.
A fascinating concept indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.